The main thing I'm going to try and give you today is a lot of value and some specific strategies that you can take away and start using. Is that better? That seems to be better. Good. So we'll start again a bit. So my primary concern today is to go through some key growth hacking strategies that you can all take away and use straight away. So if everyone's good, we'll just carry on. So one of my biggest things was when I started out working in this industry, I originally came from a marketing background, and I did the traditional marketing qualifications, psychology, and to an extent some kind of online marketing. However, when I got into growth hacking, it changed completely, and that's a lot where my skills have developed and where my consultants have become more and more integral to working with some of the big companies and also a lot of the tech startups from where we've come from. So just to give you an idea, when I first started, what we're going to look at today as well is two things: why are we actually talking about growth hacking in the first place, and also what's actually going to be a good framework for you. So I'm going to run through 5 of the key things that everyone needs to be considering if they want to apply any kind of growth hacking material or strategies to their business. So I'll try to make it as simple and straightforward as possible. But when I started originally, it was this old phrase of I'd rather be right than rich. And when I was at Istanbul, just gone with Barack, and I was sat with at dinner with Morten Lund, who's one of the original investors, I think, in Skype, and is an investor in Uber. And he said that a lot of people would actually prefer to think that they know what they were doing rather than say, okay, let's actually look at how we can be really successful with this business. And I know when I first started out, this was one of my issues, and it was a little bit down to arrogance and thinking I knew better. And when we started moving through and becoming more successful, it was because we looked at many different strategies that I needed to take on board. The first of which was to approach every kind of business and growth model with no preconceived ideas, no assumptions. This is surprisingly difficult for a lot of people. A lot of people have very strong opinions and ideas about their business, about their growth, and about the way that their online presence or company or growth model is growing and why it's growing. One of the things that we have to start with initially is come in and assume that nothing is correct so that we can then go back and test everything right from the very beginning. And by testing, we constantly reiterate what is correct and what isn't. And we can do this in a very specific way, and we'll come onto this a little bit later. But the main thing is that growth is a mindset. And so there'll be a lot of strategies that I give you today, but also it's a question of changing that mindset around to be constantly thinking about how do I constantly grow the company? How do I constantly grow the business? How do I constantly reach new people, convert them, push them down the funnel, get them to referral, and increase that monthly recurring revenue? One of the things as well, which is absolutely critical, is to start with, there must be some kind of product market fit. I virtually know everyone watching this will be very familiar with the Lean Startup, with Steve Blank's custom development strategy. If not, take some time out, read those books, and absorb them into your business immediately. But one of the difficulties that we have when we approach any company is if you don't have a product market fit from the very beginning, it makes growth very difficult. So some of the testing that we're doing is also around, well, have we got the product market fit correct first? And if we haven't, then we need to quickly identify what works and what doesn't, possibly readjust it, or make some serious decisions on where the business needs to go. One of the things I like to include is that when we're talking about growth, a lot of people are sometimes scared to think about how big their business can grow. And it's a case of you've got to be ambitious with what you're trying to do. And one of the things that we work with, so at Inception Growth, specifically we work with business owners, founders, CEs and increasingly like venture capitalists, investors, private equity companies who ask us to come in and essentially deconstruct businesses and pull them apart, understand what's going on within them, and then start to accelerate from there exactly where the growth is. One of the common factors, like I said, is everyone wants significant step change growth in their business. It's probably one of the key common factors. So with that in mind, we come in as a growth hacker, and there are many, many different terms and understandings around what this actually is. This is probably one of the better slides that I've seen on it, where it talks about things from funnel optimization to creative marketing and inbound marketing. One of the key things of the whole thing we do is that we're constantly trying to find out where, for each business, that key level of growth is. And the funny thing is that for nearly every business that I've worked in and that my consultants have worked with, it's different. There's no one single strategy that works in exactly the same way, regardless of even if it's two companies who are almost identical. It just doesn't happen. And this is based on many different things. I mean, just down to even down to like the timing of when the company first comes into the market. So this is why we have to be very adaptive on what we're doing. So in other words, what we essentially do is accelerate growth. And the way we do this is by looking at what the current growth level is, and then what do we actually want to achieve in the fastest, most effective time scale. Now, obviously, with the growth and availability of data, new measuring tools, and analytics, growth is now a science, and it's much easier to track and develop rather than just rely on gut instinct and some old war stories that may or may not be true. And this is one of the things I really love about this growth science, that there's a new level that's actually developed now. And it makes it a lot easier for us to move things forward and also test quickly what is working and what isn't working. And the reason I say that growth hacking is different is because, I mean, traditionally I come from the old school traditional marketing method, where this slide which you're seeing now would have been a very, very traditional and very, very universally accepted way of, well, this is just what every single marketing campaign has to be, where it goes through awareness, interest, evaluation, commitment, and referral. And there's constantly repeat. And the way that traditional marketing used to be was thinking about, say the new big Star Wars film is just about to be launched over here. And I think we're 2 weeks away, and is a big blockbuster, and they're doing the usual kind of thing. So they need to, but they've got the money. They've got hundreds of millions that they can throw at massive billboard advertising. Every time I turn on the TV or see some YouTube video, there's a clip for the trailer for the new Star Wars film in front of it. And that's fine if you've got hundreds of millions. However, most companies haven't, and they need to have that same kind of impact culturally as well as visually to actually be adopted. And so the reason that we move on to growth hacking is specifically to develop a way and a methodology that anyone can apply to their business. So one of the things we talk about here is I'm assuming everyone's familiar with the lean startup approach. And one of the things that we like to adopt is a kind of a lean startup methodology to the marketing. So the whole time that you're going through any kind of marketing, whatever it is, you're going through this build, measure, learn cycle. And even if this is talking about putting a very small advert, split testing it, you measure the results, you learn from that experience, and you keep reinvesting, you keep going through that cycle over and over and over again. And this is critical to actually your learning process and the speed in which you develop your growth hack. So just to lead on, this is pretty much the growth hacking framework that's now been adopted by, I would say, most of the big and certainly the fastest growing companies. And it's the R model. Dave McClure, I think he was probably the one who actually put it down on paper. And basically it runs through the most common funnel, if you like, or acquisition model that we actually use. So it starts with the acquisition, which is of course just attracting the new customers and new users. From there, it moves down into activation, where motivation, or how do we actually motivate users to take action? Retention obviously follows from there, in that we're reducing churn and trying to keep people interested so that we're not losing traction as we're trying to move forward and grow. Next then is obviously referrals, of when it keeps coming back and the user base that you have currently is almost doing the marketing for you. That's where real growth starts to take effect. And then of course the revenue, generating ongoing revenue. And this is something that's absolutely critical now, where where a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of people who are investing significant amounts want to know what your business model is straight away. Even if it's at some period down the line, they want to know that they're going to see some kind of financial return on their investment within their lifetime. So what we're going to do now is just give you 5 strategies based on the RR framework, as we like to call it, and then you can actually take them forward and use them straight away. So the first one we're going to talk about then is how do you actually attract new users? And I mean, I could talk forever on this alone, but these are some of the strategies and just some examples that we use across the board. So just to give you an idea, as well as the usual kind of strategic partnerships, SEO, blogging, some of these obviously are kind of very, very straightforward. And then it's a case of how do you almost use this kind of lean startup methodology and apply it to each one of these examples. So for example, let's look at a PR as a quite a simple, straightforward one. If you're trying to attract people, you might be looking at TechCrunch, Fast Company, Inc., Wired, many of the others. And you'd be reaching out to journalists, you'd be reaching out to the editors like Mike Butcher at TechCrunch, and you'll be trying to get them involved. And if you get lucky, or if you develop the relationship well enough, then you will actually be asked to speak with them, or they'll speak with you, and they might even run a feature. Now, even something as simple as getting your startup or your tech company featured by one of these big one of these big online media publications is almost a hack within itself. So it's very much a case of looking at how does the industry work. Once you understand that, I would definitely recommend that you can then start to manipulate it and start to drive things forward. One of the books I would recommend for this would be something like Ryan Holiday's Trust Me Online, which is an outstanding book on how the media industry works, what's happening within it, and how you can essentially manipulate and hack it. Just give you a quick example of something else. On a similar line to that, let's talk about the target market blogs. And although you can be doing your own blogs, which I think is very, very powerful and also almost a must within any startup, if you can target other blogs that are in your market and offer to work with them. So one of the things that we constantly talk about is how to leverage other people's audiences and lists and to start to bring them on board for yourself. It's quite easy to do, and if you give them something that is reciprocal, where they think, oh wow, I can't believe this company just did this to help me, then you'll actually be a trusted friend of them, and they will start to promote you more and more and more. And these things are just through very much relationships. So you have to reach out, you have to be reaching out to them in a way that they want to feature you, for example, and that there's something in it for them. A lot of people just think, oh, why wouldn't they want to write about what we're doing? We're awesome. That may be true, but always remember that whatever you reach out to them with has to help them, has to serve them, and has to directly give them something that they want. So just thinking on, one of the ones that I've used before and you may be familiar with is the acquisition side of how Hotmail got started. And I love this as it's a really cute, really sweet way of actually growing it. And originally when the founders of Hotmail, they developed it because essentially they didn't want their bosses reading their work email, so they developed Hotmail, which I love. And they asked for $300,000 to go and do billboards and radio advertising and actually try and get it out there. But of course, the executives said, no way, you're off your mind, we're not giving you any money. So it forced them to be creative. And by doing that, They then came up with this little tagline that then featured at the bottom: "P.S. I love you. Get your free email at Hotmail." And this worked on a very, very fundamental emotional level with everyone who received it. So whether they were getting these emails, and it was a little bit of a surprise, it was unexpected, they didn't realize what was going on. And because the main thing to this is that this had never been done before, and because it was so new and was such a surprise and was breaking the mold, if you like, it took people by surprise, and it worked. And the growth rate from this was exponential. It just accelerated at a rate you wouldn't believe. Now, the problem is with this is that the strategy works, but just going out and copying the exact same tagline at the bottom will not get you the same results. And the reason is that once something has been done once, it's very unlikely for it to have the same level of effect and success a second, a third. And of course, if you think about how far back Hotmail started, if you were to try and run the exact same thing again now, it just wouldn't work. And that's because the whole environment has changed. So have a think about different and creative ways that you could use, I don't know, email, for example, in a way that's interesting and new and exciting, and hit some of those key touch points. So moving on to the activation, and this is actually a lot harder than a lot of people think. A lot of people think, we'll just throw up a landing page and they'll hope that people will just sign up like crazy. Unfortunately, this comes down to actually understand the psychology of motivation. And to be honest, most people don't really understand this and don't take a lot of time to think through what would actually motivate that desired user to part with an email or part with a Facebook API as they actually link and log into. So one of the biggest problems with this is trust. Excuse me. So the problem is with trust is that there are now, like I was saying earlier with the Hotmail, the level of trust, because there are so many people out there asking for emails, asking you to sign in with Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it is, that level of trust has been eroded over many, many years. And I don't know how many times I'm trying to unsubscribe from lists that I'm pretty sure I never even signed up to. So these are one of the things you have to try and take into consideration when you're thinking about this activation thing, because everyone's got an email address. Well, virtually everyone's got an email address, but not everyone wants to spam. And so they're much more resistant to just someone saying, hey, sign up to this really cool newsletter, or sign up to when our product launch is going to be awesome. But there is a way you can do this, and this is something that I haven't shared before outside of my clients. So it's called results in advance. And one of the things we talk about here is how do you actually go through and develop a level of trust where people want to trust you, and they do, and then they love you by the end. So on the left here is your guy, and let's just take an example and say he's unhappy because he's single, he's on his own. But ideally, at the other end of the scale, on the far right, he wants to be in love and with the woman of his dreams. But as you can imagine, there's quite a few steps in between, going from being unhappy, alone, and single to meeting his dream woman and being in love and married. So although I'm discussing this and describing it in a way that isn't directly linked to what you're doing, I just want you to think about the process and how you can apply it to your business right now. So this guy is single, he's on his own, and let's say he sees a pretty gorgeous woman in the club who he thinks is stunning, but he doesn't know how to go over and speak to her. So step one in this example would be for you to give him the openings on how to actually go up and talk to an incredibly beautiful woman. And that's step one. And as you do that, you have to give him something that's going to work as well. You have to give him something that will actually make a difference. It has to be outstanding value that is free. Don't ask for anything in return at this point. Then the second step is that, so let's say he goes over there, does that, and he goes, oh wow, this actually works, and I'm now talking to her. But then the next step is, I don't know how to ask for a telephone number. Okay? Excuse me. So the next step that you give him for free, again, is this is how you ask a girl for a phone number in a way that isn't going to be weird or doesn't make you seem creepy. And the whole time you're doing this, you are increasing this level of trust. And so it's usually about step 2 or step 3 where that level of trust in you just suddenly skyrockets. And the whole point is with this process and with this strategy, you are never asking for anything in return. You're building up this bank of goodwill that people will love you for it. This is actually taken from an old internet marketing campaign that we used to run called Results in Advance, and it's incredibly effective because at no point along this step were we actually asking for money or anything like that. But what we're doing by doing this, by giving really, really high quality content, people were coming back and they were just thanking us and then asking us, what more can you give us? And then so when it came to like step 3, step 4, step 5, they were happy to part with money at that point because they had had a positive experience. The stuff that was being spoken about worked, and more importantly, the guy was getting the results he wanted without having to pay for anything. You can apply this obviously to any freemium model and it works instantly. I know it's a little bit abstract, but it's just one way to try and explain how this actually works in reality. So the next one is retention, and it's really important to keep that level of retention very high. The biggest problem that most growth hackers have at some point is not so much the acquisition and activation. People who are very good at the activation side, particularly on the motivation, are very good. But retention is difficult because at this point you're trying to constantly reduce churn, and this can be like one of the silent killers of growth of any company. And when we're talking about churn, we don't just necessarily mean people who physically leave you or physically unsubscribe or cancel. We're also looking at people who stop using your service or your product, whatever it is, and are dormant. Okay, so they're essentially signed up. They may be paying, but they're not actively engaged. And the whole time we're trying to keep them engaged. And as like Nir Eyal from who wrote Hooked will describe, they aren't hooked. There's nothing sticky about what you're doing. Famously, Facebook is probably one of the best examples that everyone uses and quotes, and it's definitely one I'd recommend. Their executive team originally, I think it was fairly near the beginning, set out a very, very high aspirational goal of 200 million users in 12 months, which would make any growth hacker or just about anyone balk at that kind of figure. So what they had to do was get very, very creative, and they really went into the depths and the details of their analytics as they started to discover where that churn rate actually hit. And famously now they found that it's they needed to have 7 friends within 10 days. And so all of their marketing, all of their user experience at that point was is now geared towards how can we accelerate that one person coming in, signing up, and getting at least 7 friends in that 10 days. And they're constantly trying to reduce that 10 days and even the number so that it's that sticky, that much of a hook that people don't want to leave for any reason. Excuse me. So, for example, if you were thinking about it in your business or whatever service that you have, it may be a case of thinking of this FOMO, fear of missing out, which is always a very, very clever one of being left behind and missing out on being in the curve with everybody else. Social media companies use this very, very well, and I've seen it recently started creeping more and more into emails and with companies who have lapsed customers who aren't actually engaged as much anymore, and there'll be communications that come out to you that then say, oh, we see you haven't been engaged, you should see what X, Y, and Z is happening, this is really cool, will really benefit you. And so it's a way of almost bringing people back into your fold and back into what you do. And from there, things really start to take off. One of their main focus is on this term of reducing friction. Friction specifically is how can you make it as easy for people to stay involved with your service, with your business, whatever it is. So you want it to be easy, simple, and minimize what they have to do. Tinder obviously have brilliantly done this, which was an evolution of hot or not, where it's just now swiping with a thumb left or right. The reason why that's clever is that is almost has no difficulty to the user experience, and is very, very easy to move through. And this has now been taken up by LinkedIn on their app, where you can just quickly swipe left or right, and that will actually make a difference on your user experience and how you actually move through the mobile app itself. So literally, how can you keep improving that experience? And it's something to consider for when you're looking at whatever retention strategy is. So referrals, this is where your growth really starts to accelerate. And when we're talking here, specifically inviting users to refer their friends. And there's been some interesting studies that have been done looking at, is it different for men and women? Is it different between age groups? And is it different between what industries you look at? And one of the things that's worth considering is that this referral strategy will work in all different markets and any different business, but it's just more down to a question of how do you set it up from the beginning that it makes people want to refer. Once you've got a referral strategy in place that actually starts to be self-perpetuating, so it essentially grows the business for you while you sleep. And if it starts to really take off, then you start to get a viral marketing campaign. But of course, virality is not actually that easy. And there's a couple of companies out there which are pretty good for developing that, such as Thunderclap has recently come in and tried to take the social media experience of virality and marry it up with referrals in a way that makes it very easy for something to become very viral very easily. So that's like one company that I would recommend you having a look at if you haven't already. To give you an example, Harry's famously did this very well. And excuse me, what they did was in a blog post, I think it was on the Tim Ferriss website, they actually wrote how they acquired 100,000 users within 1 week. And that's pretty exceptional by any startup. Excuse me, so glass there. So the reason why this was exceptional was not just the fact that the speed of the referral strategy and how quickly it worked. One of the things that Harry's did, which a lot of people kind of gloss over or they don't realize, is that the guys at Harry's spent, I think it was the best part of 2 years, traveling around the valley, meeting just about everyone they could, giving talks and demonstrations at almost every hackathon, tech event, accelerator program that they possibly could. And the way they did it was very clever. So they would go along to one of these events, they would have been asked to speak by one of the organizers, and they'd go up and they'd say, okay, this is what we're doing at Harry's, this is what it is. And our product was, or their product, sorry, was shaving blades, razors, and shaving cream. Now, the reason why this was good was that it was this kind of marketing by stealth. So when I say that, the primary audience who they were speaking to were young, male, and generally shaved. So although they were talking indirectly about their business and about how it was growing and the code and the problems that they were facing and how they were overcoming those problems, which was a hugely inspiring story, but they were also marketing the business as well, very, very subtly. So when it came to them saying, okay, we're going to go for our launch now, we're also going to put in place this 1 week launch referral strategy campaign as well, please sign up to it. And so when they came up to that, they already had a massive audience that was ready and hungry for them and were almost waiting to refer their friends to it. When they go and actually refer their friends, depending on the number of referrals that they would do, they would actually receive I think it was for 5 referrals who actually signed up and actually gave real email addresses, and that's always a bit of a problem. But for each real qualified email address, you would then receive like a pack of shaving blades. Or if you did 10, you would receive the shaving kit. If you did 25, you would receive an entire shaving kit and a month's free products. And so very, very quickly, this just exploded. And around the valley in particular, it was hugely popular, hugely successful. And a lot of people just virally just referred it as quick as they could. So some of the key things to take away from this then is that it's really easy to share. So they had used a referral campaign. I think they used Ruby on Rails to do it. And really simple bit of code. It's actually, the code is even still kicking around online, which I think you can actually probably just pick up and use. And the whole thing was that once you actually did refer it, it was a fun shared experience. And of course, it did actually appeal to people's core desires, because the whole thing about referral is that people trust a referral much more than they do a cold email or advertising or a SEO that turns up on Google. So it's much more likely to be trusted, and you're much more likely to get other referrals signing up as a result. It's a really cool case study. I'd definitely be worth checking it out. So lastly, and certainly not least, is the revenue. And how do you actually generate ongoing revenue? As I said at the beginning, the revenue strategy that you need to have needs to be in place right from the word go. Or if it's not in place, there needs to be that framework or structure within a specific time frame that anyone coming to you and they say, what's your revenue strategy? You've got it in place already. Freemium at the beginning is absolutely fine, but very quickly you need to start ramping up. How does that actually translate into a sustainable revenue model? There are lots of different ways of actually thinking about revenue in this respect, and there's a lot of really, really good books and talks about how do you get people to adopt a higher pricing strategy, for example. So, I mean, this is one which I just found online, and obviously you see in the middle is the most expensive one, when traditionally the way that most companies have this is that it's a sliding scale from regular to basic to premium, and this one has changed it around a bit, and they've stuck the middle one in the center, brought it forward as a way, and then actually promoted it as the more successful one. Now, of course, obviously the actual terms underneath are meaningless, but I wanted to give you an example of how you can think differently. And one of the keys to this, which we'll come on to in a minute, is split test everything. Nothing is set in stone, and it goes back to our original discussion when we were looking at, no, you can't make any assumptions. There's a really interesting talk. I think it's on one of the TED Talks, and it was talking about a pricing strategy. And what happened is that there was a online web company, I forget the name, and they actually put up a basic, an advanced, and a professional 3-tiered pricing model. And they actually made a mistake and put the pricing of advanced and professional as the same. So in this example, the same would have been basic, no charge, advanced, let's hypothetically say $100 a month, and professional also $100 a month. And obviously they had different packages and different levels of subscription that you would get with that. But the interesting thing was that everyone went straight to professional, and everyone missed out, in this example, advanced. Now, if you think that and you extrapolate that and take it through to any kind of pricing model you look at, if you want to push psychologically people up to the top end of whatever it is you're doing, people will go for basic, they'll go for premium, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to think about pushing people up to whatever be the most expensive version of your service or product, and if you look at pricing the 2 tiers of advanced and professional very, very close together, and almost making it a no-brainer, almost making it an obvious call to go for the professional, you will psychologically push everyone towards your more expensive option rather than your medium priced option. And while we're doing this, the whole thing that we're trying to achieve is a consistently higher and growing monthly recurring revenue. So Google have been very, very good at this with AdSense, in that they're constantly looking at how do we actually change our monthly revenue cycle so that it actually increases month on month rather than just stay static. And one of the things which we always talk about is split testing all different revenue streams. So never assuming anything the same. Even if you were looking at something like freemium versus a $1 free trial per month, then that's $1 extra per month coming in to increase your MMR. Your MRR. Also, if you might want to look at a difference in actually trialing with a universal increase across all services of a price going up. And this is where you can exponentially really increase a lot of your revenue very, very quickly. So if you were to increase your increase from a freemium trial to a $1 freemium trial and increase it for, say, a period of, say, 10 months or just 5 months, and look at what effect that has on the numbers of on the retention strategy, is these linkages that start to make an impact on when you're actually looking at growth in a specific and strategic way. I'll give you an example. So one of the things as well, when you're thinking about increasing your revenue stream, there's more and more now is saying, oh, put your phone numbers on, give us your phone number for increased security. I don't know if you've seen this on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter recently. And, you and I both know the reason for them asking for this isn't for, to a little bit, they get to increase our security. However, they also get your telephone number, which then gives their sales operators an opportunity to phone you and upsell you some advertising or some premium packages or some monthly recurring invoicing. But that's the whole reason for it. And so it's just something that can be as incidental as like a telephone number for many people. If you've got hold of that data, it can then also be sold if you wanted it to, if you stipulated it within the contract, or alternatively, at the very minimum, it gives you an opportunity to upsell those customers to anything else you want to do. Well, finally, another one, obviously, we've just passed Black Friday, and then there's Cyber Monday, and goodness knows what else there'll be come next year. But you can create these events yourself, or even if it's not just you, it can be you and a group of others who start to look as more like a conglomerate and suggest, why don't we organize some kind of strategic event where everyone gets X% off all of these complementary programs. So the whole time the revenue is constantly compounding itself, where you're trying to increase that every single time. So just to finish up then, because I'm aware I've talked quite a lot, the hacking of actually growth hacking, again, it just comes down to these 5 things that's a really useful framework. So acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and of course revenue. And I think once you've got that, it actually then starts to make a lot more sense and starts to speed things up very quickly. I've put together some resources for everybody, so you can get hold of any of the. I think I've included a lot of the speakers and a lot of the examples in those resources. Sorry. So if there's anything in there that which you need, and I'll be constantly adding to that, because I think I'd rather have people with access to all these kind of resources rather than just relying on me or trying to find it through Google can be a bit of a nightmare. So that's pretty much where we are. And Barak, I think that's probably over to yourself. Okay, now some questions. Excuse me, sorry about the cough as well, everyone.
Thank you for the great presentation. And if you have questions, please write down. Ross can also see.
Thank you, Barak. It's a pleasure.
And probably
Okay, so we've got a question here from Devang, I think it is. He says, how do we get initial user and build a community? Okay, so This is a really, really good question, really important. So, building the community is one of the biggest things I would recommend that you focus on, particularly at the startup stage and getting in with that. And I would start by suggesting that you first
Is
look
it
at,
okay?
yeah, sorry, is you first by looking at who is your target market, who are the people that you're trying to reach initially, because many people aren't very good at understanding who their key target actually is. So I would probably um, start by looking at who your exact customer is, and then from there start thinking about who they are, where they go, what they do, what they read, what they write, where they visit, what websites they go on, what blogs they read. And then from there, I would actually start reaching out to whoever those key persons of influence are within those communities, because those communities are already there. So as a case, rather than try and build something from scratch, I'm more concerned about how can I quickly go to people who already have my audience and start to develop relationships with them. I hope that answers your question. Cool, thanks. Glad it did, Devon. Pleasure,
I think
okay,
Egemen is going to ask a question. He's writing down.
yeah. Okay, so we've got the question here. What kind of tools should we use to understand our customers or users better? Okay, so obviously the main one, which I think everyone will be using, is Google Analytics. Is still very, very far and away one of the best to actually understand how people are moving around within the websites. And I'd be recommending that, those are still one of the key things that people use. Everyone in the community also loves SEM Rush, and Kissmetrics is obviously very, very good. And I think is a question as well is not just thinking about tools as in what ones can we use from online, but I'd also be thinking about developing quick questionnaires that can be fired out or can be used in some kind of strategic way as well to just gain some further insight. Because there'll be a lot of times when what you'll see is like an anomaly in your data, and for some reason it won't quite make sense, and it can take a lot of time and testing to find out why customers behaving in a certain way. And what you can do, which shortcuts that very quickly, is put out a quick questionnaire to a select group of people if you're able to, and basically just go for the outliers. So the people who say we absolutely hate this or we absolutely love it, and then just delve into them and understand them a bit further. I think that's a really useful tool that you can use straight away. Got another question here. How can we benefit from the blogs to be able to work together to promote our startup? Thanks. So I think kind of the question there is how can we come across as beneficial to the blogs so they promote our startup? I think that's what you're asking. So the way I'd probably say that is that blogs are constantly trying to get traffic, and you want to essentially be going to these blog posts, or I mean that's how a blog makes money. They make money generally through more and more subscribers, through increased page views, and if obviously the blog has got advertising on it, the more page views they get, the more money they get. So they want to be reaching out and making these strategic relationships with people like yourselves. So never underestimate how powerful your audience is, no matter how small, because it can again be very, very powerful within your community that can actually be very influential within theirs, and they love that. So I would be talking about going to them and essentially saying, look, I've got some ideas on how we can actually promote what you're doing, what your blog is doing to our audience. And it's almost then this reciprocation. There's like, I'll do you a favor, you do me a favor. And I wouldn't actually go and say that exactly to them, but I would say, look, we love what you're doing, to whoever this blogger is. Do you mind if we get it out to our audience? And they'll come back and say, oh, right, that sounds cool. Who's your audience? Our audience is all these young tech-savvy guys who are in their 20s who just love your product. And they'll be like, oh, that sounds really cool, great, why don't I do something for you as well? And this is how these kind of relationships start to build. And as long as you can deliver, which is really, really important, as long as you can deliver to that, they will love you. Got another question here. Hi Ross, building a growth team overnight is difficult and can be costly. Man, you've got that right, Norman. So what do you suggest would be a less costly way for keeping the monthly revenue keeping the monthly revenue in place? So I assume I think what Norman is asking there is building a growth team is obviously costly. How can you build a growth team, or how can you build a team that has growth in the same kind of way? One of the things I would do is look strategically and think. I mean, I'm always trying to think lean with every kind of business that I'm working with. Is how can we achieve more with less? So whether that's actually bringing in people who can do specific tasks. So if I was recommending something, I'd be looking at, let's say you're trying to get your product voted higher on Upvote or Product Hunt or anything, right? I'd be looking at something maybe in a bit of a slightly Machiavellian, slightly sneaky way, by going on something like Mechanical Turk. I don't know if you use that, and looking at actually outsourcing to other people for a very, very small cost what you want them to do. Or Fiverr.com is incredible for increasing just about anything you want to do. It can be done through Fiverr at some point, because there are people out there who will do it at a fraction of what it would cost to have someone actually in place. Another really good one obviously is Upwork, where you can get something a bit more technical that needs to be done, or even something like 99 Designs, where you can then go get a website split test that you know. Say you went to 99 Designs, you got two landing pages done. You take those 2 landing pages for a fraction of the cost. You take them to something like 5-second test, which obviously lean startup use all the time, and quickly split test that to find out which one you want is going to be working best, and then just pay whichever one gets the highest click-through rate on 99 Designs, and you can do all that for virtually peanuts. Okay, so I'd be looking at thinking more creatively about how you can achieve the same things, but just outsourcing it in a way that's very, very specific. I hope that helps. Got one question here. How can we reduce churn? Okay, very, very short question, massive answer, so I won't go into too much depth. One of the things I would say is that if you're trying to reduce churn, the main thing to consider is that for some reason, whoever is leaving yourselves, they're leaving you for a reason, and you need to understand why. There'll be a variety of reasons why they are actually leaving your website or your lists or whatever it is. And when you start to see a pattern, then you start to need to understand why they're leaving and then address it quick. Either kill it or move on, change what they're doing or the experience they have. Fundamentally, it will be some kind of emotional or psychological benefit that they're not receiving and that they thought they were going to receive. So this is actually called psychological dissonance, where someone essentially is like it's a bit like a politician, isn't it? Let's be honest. They all promise something and then they don't deliver, or they admit they lied. We're not getting too political there, but so it's something to consider, where if someone feels that they haven't received what they thought they were going to receive generally, and that might be a service level, that might be belief that the cost doesn't equate to what they're actually receiving, and then they start to leave. So look at that first, but understand what that trend is. There'll be a trend within that churn rate that you need to really get down to the bottom of. Hope that's good. Ravi, got one here. What kind of process can we follow, or methodology to retain our users? Basically, what can we do to improve our customer satisfaction? Okay, so this is slightly different from the churn question a second ago. Probably one of the key things to do to improve customer satisfaction is over deliver and constantly try and surprise them. It probably sounds a bit cliched, but if you can actually keep delivering consistently, that's actually not enough to keep people satisfied with what you're doing. And it's a sad case that part of the reason why McDonald's or any of these fast food companies do very well is because consistently they're very bad, and you kind of know that no matter where you are in the world, you're going to have a bad experience, but you know what the experience is going to be. So what you need to do to improve customer satisfaction is almost consider yourself as whatever level it is you're producing at the moment is not good enough, and then think, how can we take it that next step up? How can we improve that customer service that they love, and occasionally surprise them. So, for example, LinkedIn did this recently. Well, not that recently, probably about a year ago now, where they did this campaign where they went through and awarded people these stars of, like, you're one of LinkedIn's top 1% or top 5%. And people were shouting it from the rooftops. It was insane. And people saying, "Oh, look how popular and successful I am. You know, I'm one of LinkedIn's top people." And it was such a scam. It was unbelievable. But it tapped into this kind of surprise of, oh wow, LinkedIn thinks, not only does LinkedIn think I'm good, but all the people who view my profile think I'm amazing because I'm in the top 1, 5, 10% or whatever it was. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something physical you give them. It doesn't necessarily have to be an improvement to the service. It can just be a nice ego stroke that these people have that make them feel even better about themselves. So that's a really clever way without actually having to give any money away, which I always like. I've got another question here. How can we get trust? How can users trust? How can we get users trust, and what must we do first? Okay, so I mean, this comes down a lot to pleasure, Ravi. I think this comes down a lot to when people are asking for signups, and I see it more and more where people just say sign up here for X, sign up here for our newsletter, sign up here for when our launches, and that's fine. That works to an extent, but I'm more interested in how can I increase that experience so that they are, blown away. So they are, because anyone can just say sign up to my website. If you sign up to the website and then they receive something free from you, a gift, a report, a piece of software. If you look at AppSumo, they're very, very good at constantly over-delivering. And so the trust that I have with someone like Noah Kagan's AppSumo is very, very high because his company is constantly giving you something and then increasing that user experience. And so when it then comes to a point of asking for some money, for example, for a additional feature or an additional service, that level of trust between myself and AppSumo was already there. So it's not a question of do I trust them. It's more of a case of, okay, this seems pretty good. Yeah, let's go for it, or let's trial it, or whatever it is. So it's almost this thing of delivering and being very, very good at delivering something of a very high quality. A lot of people, if you look at some of the people who are, I don't know, quote unquote famous brands online, so Tim Ferriss, your James Altucher, your Lewis Howes, Eric Ries, so on and so forth, all these people who have very, very big influential followings. If you look at them, they always try and give you something first for free. And that first thing they give you free is very, very good. And so it makes you want more because you've already had a little taste and you trust them as a result. And it's like, okay, I'm comfortable with this. I'm happy to move forward to that next step. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so a bit of a long way. It seems the growth hacking works well if your targets are public communities or random users. So how does it work with business solutions? I mean, with corporate solutions, your main target will be busy pros, or who may or may not visit the website every day, and you may not get attentions and short sequences. Tactics still valid. Okay, so this is quite a common question as well when we're talking about B2C and B2B. one of the things I would always say is never necessarily to assume that people who are B2C are different from B2B. Everyone still has that same switch at some point. And a lot of the B2B stuff that we've done in the past works just as well, but you have to be a lot more strategic with it. One of the things that is with a couple of clients that we've had is to be targeting, for example, much higher up the corporate ladder. Yeah. So if you're mainly trying to, I don't know, approach say sales guys to implement a new CRM system, off the top of my head, a lot of people will be trying to approach managers, the users, people like that. To be honest, that doesn't really work very well, and it's a very, very long, hard process because the buying process for a lot of those kind of bigger companies can actually take up to a year. So what we actually target is specifically going in at strategic level and actually approaching and doing a targeted campaign at very, very high up. So usually like CEO or director level, because anything further down than that, people can say no. Now, the way you do that is it has to be kind of a drip campaign. So as in like very small, incremental, non-intrusive ways, because people who are CEOs generally react in a very different way. One of the strategies I'd recommend would be to prime their social networks. This is a strategy that I've referred to in a couple of other presentations, where you actually almost look at who their influencers are and who influences them. And now LinkedIn allows you to do this with absolutely anyone in the world, so there's really no excuse. Find out who they're being influenced by, align yourself with whoever they are, and then start to leverage that so that when you do the approach at a CEO level, for example, they already know who you are because everyone else has been talking about them, or they can find you very quickly that you're linked in with everyone. The way to then take that forward is so that it's a case of, oh wow, we really got to be talking to these guys. They seem to know everyone in our network. Why aren't we talking to them? And it's almost a foregone conclusion. It sounds, maybe I've described it in an overly simplistic way, but it is very, very powerful. And it's mainly at the moment because no one else seems to be using the strategy. So that's just one example of something I would recommend, but very, very good. Okay, so I've got some nice thank yous from people. I'm glad that's helping. Norman again. So I've worked with some high-tech companies, and those companies grew sales through email marketing. That's it. Do you think sending customized emails to the right audience would help? Definitely. So customized emails are always really, really powerful. And I remember doing a lot of email marketing at the beginning of my apprenticeship, I suppose you could say. And email marketing, one of the things I like about email marketing, this is like a little strategy that I use that seems to work really well, is a lot of companies, particularly, with the advent of MailChimp and Aweber and everything else, do almost overly corporate emails constantly. I've no idea why. I've no idea why all of these, so many emails I get through look like they're from some massive corporation. So one of the things I do is, and I'd recommend to everyone, is to split test and almost go the other way. So actually look at doing an email or an email campaign or sequence to your email list that just looks like it's just from a guy, that just looks like it's from you to your friend. Do it in a really, really genuine way. That's like how would you email your friend and tell them something cool? Hey, you really got to check this out. I'd love it. I think it's something to just experiment with. I think you'd be surprised at how effective that is. And it's because you're not being traditional. And if you're not traditional, you create mystery around you, and people love that. So that's what I'd recommend. I hope that helps. And I think that's pretty much it.
Rose, thank you. Thank you for an hour great presentation and question and answer session. And hope to see you in Turkey again. I think all startups will be at Startup Turkey at the end of February. We are excited to.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Barak, and it's been great to actually interact with some really, really great attendees as well. So just want to thank everyone for hanging on the line as well, and putting up with my cough. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Well. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.